Hi everybody, my name is Jens Larsen. The Triad is probably one of the most powerful devices to create melodies. If we just listen to songs like or they're all triad melodies, so it makes sense that we want to spend some time checking out the triads and figuring out which triads we can use over which chords, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, about improvising over chord changes or some interesting chord voicings, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. The chord progression that I'm using is a 12-bar blues in the key of F, and I'm going to go over how you can choose different triads for all the chords. I also have a solo that I played and transcribed that I'm going to analyze and talk about how I'm using the triads, because the solo is only using triads in fact. So really what I'm doing here is, of course, I'm just starting with the basic chord, which is the F major triad. And then I'm also using the triad that's from the third and the one from the fifth. And then in this case, we can also use the one that's sort of the parallel minor of F7. So that would be the one that's actually like a minor third below, and that would be D minor. If we do the same for B flat 7, and the triads would be B flat, then D diminished, F minor, and G minor. In the fourth bar, before we go to B flat 7, I have an F7 with a flat 9. So the scale that goes with that one would be F7 Mixolydian with a flat 9 and a flat 13. Arpeggios that we get in there is again first the one from the root, so just an F major triad. Then we get an A diminished, again still the same. And now we start to get some different extensions on there, so we get a C diminished and an E flat diminished. After the F7 flat 9 we get a B flat 7 of course, and then from there we go to a B diminished, and the scale that I'm using on a B diminished is C harmonic minor, because I find that that's the scale that's the closest to sort of an F7 sound and still has a B diminished in there. And the triads I'm using on the B diminished are really simple, so that's just the B diminished triad, and then the D diminished triad, F diminished, and A flat diminished. The B diminished chord takes us back to F7, and from the F7 we go to a D7 flat 9 that's taking us to the G minor in the final cadence. And since it's a D7 that's resolving to a minor chord, then the logical scale choice for that one would be harmonic minor, so in this case that's a G harmonic minor scale, and the arpeggios or the triads would be D major, F sharp diminished, A diminished, and C diminished. The G minor 7 is part of a cadence to F major, and that's a G minor Dorian sound. The triads that you have in here would be the G minor triad, the B flat major triad, and the D minor triad. The final chord is the second chord in the cadence, and that's a C7, and I'm playing it as a C7 altered. And the triads, the first one is a D flat minor, then we get an E augmented, G flat major, and then B flat diminished. So now we have a few different triads that we can use for each of the chords. As you can see, mostly I'm just taking really basic structures out of the chords, so I'm just looking at the triads that are found on the root and on the third and on the fifth, and then sometimes I'll take one or two other ones. Let's look at the chorus that I played. For the first chord, so the F7, I'm really just stating the F7 blues sound and using an F major triad, but then in first inversion, so that's... Then we move to B flat 7, and here I'm using the arpeggio from the third, so that's a D diminished triad, and I'm also using that in first inversion as a sort of answer. Then we move back to the F7 in bar 3. And here I'm using a D minor triad, which is kind of giving us like an F7 with a 13 type sound. And here the melodic idea is, I'm kind of using voice leading to take this onto the F7 flat 9 in bar 4. So I'm turning the D minor triad into an E flat diminished triad. And then on the B flat 7, I'm using the triad that's found on the 5th, so that's an F minor triad. And I'm using that triad and also kind of just changing that triad for the next chord. So the B diminished, I'm using an F diminished triad. And then I'm actually continuing with that idea also on the F7, because now I just go back to an F major triad. So what I have here is that I can use sort of F minor, and then F diminished, and then finally F major for those 3 bars. Then we go to D7, and here I'm using an F sharp diminished triad. And then in the cadence, here I start to use more triads together in the same bar. So on the G minor 7, the first one is a B flat major, and then a G minor. And then on the C7 altered, I'm using first a G flat, and then an E augmented. And then I go to F on the F7. And then there's just a few chords for the turnaround. There are a few things that are worth noticing about this solo and about the way you can use triads. And one thing is, of course, you can use the triads as sort of an alternate progression that is easier to play but really emphasizes the chords in a nice way. So that's the example that I'm using on the B flat 7, B diminished to F, where I'm using first F minor, F diminished, and then taking that up to an F major triad on the F7. Another thing that works really well is this idea of voice leading the triads together. So if you can move from one chord to the next and then just change a few notes in the triad that you're playing, you have a really strong melodic idea. So that could be something like using the D minor and then going to E flat diminished on the F7 flat 9. And then you can of course resolve that to the B flat 7. So that's a really strong idea to check out, and those kind of things are worth looking for if you're trying to come up with some nice ideas with the triads. I of course already made a lot of other videos on using triads and using triad pairs. So if you want to dig a little bit into that and check out some more material on that, I link to some videos in the description of this video. A sort of bonus feature to this approach is also that if you're working on it like I'm doing in the beginning of the chorus, with only one triad per chord, then you only have 3 notes that you can use in that bar. And that means you're not going to be running too many 8 notes, because that gets predictable and quite boring to listen to. So you have to be a little bit more creative with the rhythms. And this way of playing really opens up and forces you to play some more interesting rhythms and focus a little bit more on that. And that can be really healthy for your playing, because in jazz we tend to play everything full of 8 notes and be a little bit undynamic in that respect most of the time. To get better at playing these solos with triads, because as you can tell in my solo also, I'm not just playing the triad in the root position, I'm using a lot of different patterns and a lot of different inversions as well. And to check that out, it's probably better to see them in the context of the scale, because that's sort of relating it back to the chord that you're playing also, and you kind of want to have the relationship with the chord and with the scale in there when you're thinking about the triads, because then they make more sense and you know where the notes are going if you understand the progression. So if we just take the F7 as an example, of course you want to do the basic exercise of just playing the diatonic triads in that scale, so that would be this. But you probably also want to do the different inversions in the scale. And that could be something like this. If I do the first inversion, then that would be this starting on D minor. Or the second inversion. Another thing that can be useful is also just to, when you're sort of thinking in this position, just to run all of the triad notes in that position. So if I take the F major triad, then that could be something like this. So that's just a basic sort of F major triad position, but it's nice to just have it somehow related to the scale. And when you're doing that, it can also make sense to just do that in inversions. So that could be something like this. Another great exercise if you want to gain some more flexibility for improvising with triads is to play them in different patterns. So if you think of a triad as being 1, 3, and 5, so 1, 3, 5, you can of course change the order of those notes. So if I play 3, 1, 5, then that could be something like this if I take it through the scale. And of course you can do all sorts of different things with that. And the more you try, again, this is not about really playing it fast, it's just about trying out the different options, and it's going to help you have more options once you try to improvise with the triads. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar and it's the first time you see one of my videos, then subscribe to my channel. I publish a new lesson every Monday and Thursday, and I've been doing this for quite some time, so there's already really a lot of material on my channel. If you want to help me keep making all these videos, then check out my Patreon page. I'm very grateful for the support that I'm getting from my patrons, and if you're supporting me over on Patreon, I can give you something in return for your support. That's about it for this week. Thank you for watching, and until next week.